Hey everybody, welcome to Black Lotus Live, where we talk about all things strange and unusual. And tonight we are talking with Adam Gell. And we're going to be talking about the Akashic Records, and we're going to be talking about UFOs, and we're also going to be talking about past lives and a documentary he's made about his. So, but first I want to give a shout out to Coral. Coral, it's nice to see you here. I'm kind of surprised to see you here, considering Rich's show is on tonight. Please know that you're under no obligation to be here if his show is on. We just had to do it at this time to save time on ourselves. So
we appreciate it.
Here. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks a lot for being here, Coral. You're great.
Thanks for everything you do, Coral.
Yes.
So, viewers, let me give you a rundown on Adam Gell. He is a retired middle school physical education teacher working in the public system for 30 years. He also worked as a landscape photographer, writer, documentary filmmaker, and he currently hosts his own podcast and works as a Reiki practitioner and mentor. He's going to send me the link to that podcast, and I'll drop it in the description below. So you can check it out after the show. I've also dropped his link to his website, and where you can learn more about what he does with Reiki and the Akashic Records and all of that. And there's also a trailer there. Now, unfortunately, I didn't set this up because I'm kind of an idiot. But he has a trailer there for his documentary about his past life in Nazi Germany.
No, documentary is not about that, but we'll talk about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
we'll get that cleared up.
Yeah, I'll clarify that.
So, Adam, it's great to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with the Akashic Records. What exactly are they?
Well, the Akashic Records are an imprint of each person's soul's journey, almost like throwing a rock into a lake or a pond and watching the ripple effect take place from once the rock goes in. It's just the amount of energy that keeps moving outwards. Our own personal energy does the same thing and gets recorded in the Akasha, which is in the fifth dimension. And that energy that we give off, our thoughts, our actions, are recorded there and held as an imprint. And a person who reads an Akashic can read the Akashic Records, whether the person themselves accessing their own Akashic Records or for someone else is reading the information of that person's personal imprint and getting it a vibrational message, either through a holographic message or through sound or through touch or feel. And it's a place where we receive the information that helps our soul grow to remove the barriers that are in the way for soul growth.
That's really fascinating. I had no idea.
Oh, I had mine done. You have to. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. I can remember 9 of my past lives. And when my friend did mine, Akashic, I'd never heard of the Akashic Records, but I had a dream. This is weird. my mom, who had already passed, was working in Target, and she was in the cart corral opening up a drawer, a file cabinet, and she goes, the answers are in here. And so when I told my friend, she goes, oh, well, you need to have your Akashic Records done. And she did, I think, I can't remember now if it was 14 or 17, but I know my lesson started in the 14th century and it's just repeated, and it's kept repeating. And when she told me that, I'm like, oh, you're absolutely right. And so I have changed. So I don't do that thing anymore. and the world has just changed since then for me. I would like for it to change and be a little bit better, but but it's getting there. So did you find you had the same type of experience when you did your records?
Well, I would say that based upon the story that I've come to understand about myself, the story or my past lives that were accessed or brought forward to me helped me resolve certain physical ailments and certain psychological barriers that were in my way of growing, as you just spoke about. Specifically, I would say maybe about 10, 12 years ago, I had asthma, and every time I looked at the vent in my school building, my gym, I would get a panic attack, and I didn't understand why I was feeling this deep anxiety of looking at a vent coming on the ceiling. That was one of the manifestations of what I was feeling. And so one of my coworkers who had saw a healer had told me, why don't you visit this person, and maybe they can give you a little insight or help you out. And I wasn't into any Reiki. I wasn't into any type of healing at that time. I called the person on the phone, and the person said to me, I think you have asthma. And I didn't mention anything that I was feeling. He said, why don't you come in and we'll discuss it. So as I was going over the years and he was assisting me, I was opening up to more of a spiritual realm of having a deeper understanding of the energies that exist in the universe, and being able to either access them or have a deeper connection to my own intuition. And along with that, I was interested I heard about the Akashic Records. So I wound up studying it a little bit. I studied on a woman by the name of Gabrielle Orr. And she did a reading for me and told me, and if I just go back a little bit before I just tell you what she told me, I had lived in Germany for a year. I have a Jewish background and a Russian background. My mother was Jewish, my father was Russian after the war, World War II. And I happened to have married a German woman. I went to Germany to study in Germany for about a year. And I picked up the language very easily within a year and was made it into university as a matriculating student. Along with that, I had a deep understanding of the history of World War II and all that. That was back in 1987. Skip forward to this 2000 and maybe 12 or 13 when I had the reading. The woman said to me, do you speak German? And I never told her any of the information. And I said, I do. And she said, I said, I have a deep fear of doctors. She goes, I understand. She said, you were actually a doctor in the concentration camps. And I see where you were, and I see the camp you were in. And I see that you came from a Christian mother and a Jewish father from World War II. I took that information in, and just hearing, I guess, this type of information, as you mentioned, hearing certain remnants of the past, opened me up to a connection from something that was probably lurking in the background, but I was unable to see on a conscious level. So as I learned how to read the Akashic Records, I did my own Akashic Record reading for myself, and I heard Berlin, and I saw a family. I couldn't make out any type of specific faces, but I kind of got that feeling. Skip 10 years later, when a person is I'm doing a healing session on someone, and the person says to me, in the middle of the healing session, towards the end, he said, I remember you from the concentration camps. And I was taken back, but not so much, because I was already awoken to that information from that first reading that I had done. And she explained to me, she says, I see you sitting there and with suspenders on in a chair, and she just had a past life memory from something. So eventually she was able to do a Akashic Record reading, and she told me that I had a Christian mother and a Jewish father, and I came from Berlin. And that was the information that I accessed on my own.
It's that validation. Wow. I mean,
validation is very strong. So about a month ago, I was interviewing a couple who, focus in on past life regression. And they, after the interview was finished, they said, I think that we know someone that's going to know you. So a woman wrote me back maybe the following day, and she said, I remember you from Auschwitz. And I said, I had,
Wow.
now hearing this not confirmed, but to hear somebody else extraneous to what the two types of experiences that I had, and hearing this, it was not shocking, but it was like a confirmation in some way for me to feel this way. And I, along with that, did a remote viewing of like the school or the places, and I realized that in Berlin there was a school or university called the Charité, which is a hospital in Berlin. And I drew a building, and when I looked on the internet, the building replicated the images that I saw on the internet of a red building and a corridor and like a quad in the back of the hospital where most of the doctors studied that were taken to the war effort to help the soldiers, and some of them themselves, like I just mentioned, I didn't mention they were taken to the camps to work as doctors. But this particular woman said, you took me off the line and you saved my life. You told me to help you in delivering pregnancies. So
When you get this validation, is it like a wave that washes over you and you know it's right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't have the need to tell a story to tell a story. I had a need to uncover a feeling, an emotion attached to a specific story. And in telling the story makes it easier for me to confront my own traumas and stresses or anxieties that I felt or feel. Specifically, which in this life, if I look at what has exactly got in the way, was I had a fear of darkness, a tremendous fear of darkness. I guess the mistrust in what was presenting to people during the Holocaust, and me now having to go to a doctor and look at a person who's trying to tell me something, and me having mistrust for the diagnosis and mistrust for the prognosis, whatever it might have been. And I experienced it. I get a complete panic attack, but I'm more aware of it now so that I don't really judge myself. Because you're battling yourself when you're feeling an anxiety and say, come on, you're old enough, you should be able to overcome this. But if you could veer it in a direction of some specific trauma, or not make an excuse, then you realize that it becomes much easier for you to realize it's a lesson, but it's also something that you have to overcome.
Do you think, I'm sorry, your fear of doctors and the Holocaust and everything, do you think that has catapulted you in your Reiki work?
I absolutely believe so, because it put me in a different direction of helping people.
Yeah.
In a different genre of life, rather than it being medical, maybe becoming more metaphysical, and using my energy and the insight and the intuition that I have to go a little bit deeper. And I think that was a lesson for me to learn that there is more to it than just that.
Right. I can understand how the Akashic Records would help somebody throughout their lives, because that's what we're here for. We're here to learn from our past and to evolve from that. But how does one access the Akashic Records?
Yeah, let me just touch upon a point, and I'm going to answer that question. The Akashic Records is not just about accessing our pasts. From most of the information, actually just being in the energy, and I'll touch upon how we access it. Being in the energy itself creates a shift in consciousness, because we're going through the eighth chakra, we're reaching a higher vibration, and that vibration creates a shift in our consciousness and in our energetic field. And for when our present creates our future. So if we're creating a future, a present of awareness, and we're removing blockages, then we're also receiving information through the Akashic Records of what possible futures can be. And also working in the present mode of what are some of the things that are in the way now, in terms of relationships, in terms of financial decisions, or health decisions, or health issues. Those are all things that are in the present. As it relates to the accessing of the prayer is accessed. The Akashic Records are accessed with a prayer, and this prayer was handed down from the Mayan tradition, which was written in the personal Mayan hieroglyphics, which was passed down to a person who then translated the Mayan hieroglyphics into a Spanish prayer, which was then converted into an English prayer. So there's a specific prayer that's said, and that prayer itself creates a high energy, which gives the person who says the prayer the ability to then access the Akashic records for themselves.
I see.
So it's only one particular thing. Is it a chant as a prayer? Is it that kind of thing?
No, it's not a chant. It's a specific prayer that is read out loud once and then read silently twice.
And then at that point, then you can start.
And at that point,
reaching a level.
Right. At that point, if your vibrational energy is high enough, you'll feel something. You usually feel something in the heart or in the solar plexus. Or some people feel it in their third eye. They'll feel like somebody pressing on their third eye. The problem is when we try to force something and try to receive something out of ego, or blocking ourselves out of ego, where we don't really feel because we don't see it, we don't believe it.
And what are the things we have to do to get to the higher vibrational states?
Well, I would say, first of all, one of the barriers is belief. Having the faith that we have the ability to access it is one of the things that creates a higher energy. Of course, there are other things that we can do where we breathe, meditate, eating good foods, opening up the third eye. But from a energetic standpoint, believing that we are capable of doing it, having the confidence to do something in terms of that is the first step of opening up the Akashic records. So I don't think that you have to be at a high vibrational state. I think you have to be in an open state, acceptance. When you're ready to accept something, most of us have a tough time accepting because we put up a wall or a barrier to what's really out there.
Right.
Yep. One of the things I do is I have a Moldavite Hermiker necklace. So I'm like this all the time. It's not good when I'm driving, but I'm in a higher vibration.
Yeah.
How accurate is this? And I imagine that science doesn't validate it.
Well, science does validate it because there was Irvin Laszlo, who was a Nobel Peace Prize candidate, who spoke about the quantum field and that there's the space between the spooky space between everything is wave packets, and those wave packets is known as the Akasha. It's actually known in Hindu as the Akasha. So this is something that is actually validated in science. It may not be called the Akashic Records. It's known as the Book of Life in the Bible, and there is validation of the quantum field, of our interaction or our play between our thoughts and emotions being reverberated back to us in terms of manifestation. So there is some validation from that.
If someone was interested in doing this and starting this, where would they go for their resources?
Well, I give readings, but if a person wanted to read a book on this, I suggest the Gabrielle Orr. She wrote a book called One True Love. She's an author and a teacher of the Akashic Records in terms of teaching people she teaches them how to access, but more so how to become a consultant themselves if they wanted to learn how to become a reader for someone else. Yeah, but the main thing is the specific prayer itself, as I just mentioned, and in terms of, as you mentioned before, accuracy. Accuracy would be, the Akashic Records is not a psychic reading. An Akashic Record reading is whatever information that is passed on from high vibrational energy, like what are known as the masters and teachers or loved ones, ancestors of ours. When a person gives a reading like myself and I give information and a person validates it by recognizing that it holds true for them or what they need to do, in essence, to shift. This is the information that's being passed through. So, for example, if a person is fearful during these times of the last 2 years of the pandemic, of whatever took place, and after a while I'm doing a reading, I'm seeing the person smoking cigarettes. and I'm seeing the person in the house all the time, and the person then says, I never leave the house, but meanwhile they smoke cigarettes. So what is the issue is, are they afraid of dying from cigarette smoking, or are they afraid of dying from a pandemic? And the real issue, which is the information that was shown to me when I did the reading, was when the person was a child, the person was held in such regard as they had to be perfect. And meaning perfect means you can't be sick. So if you get sick, then you're not whole. So what was really being presented 40 or 50 years later to this person was, if you go out and get sick, then you're not whole and complete. But smoking cigarettes had nothing to do with a person feeling whole and complete. It was just almost a habit. Not looking as if there was a correlation between smoking and health and the pandemic and health, or what we were presented with. So in terms of when a person gets a reading, the information will come through that will help a person's shift. It's more of a soul shift of information that helps them, that they validate most of the time. Well, they don't see it.
One quick question. Is the ether, I've always heard it's in the ether, it's in the ether. Is the ether the same thing as the Akashic?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's another name for it. That's another name for it in Hindu.
Okay.
So it's a Sanskrit word meaning ether. It's like an elemental metaphysical sense.
Uh-huh.
Basis and essence, like of all things.
Because it became a joke with us, like, I don't know, it's in the ether. It's out there somewhere.
Right. Well, they consider, like, you have earth, water, fire, and air, and the Akasha is space in between.
Okay. That's funny, because I was having a discussion about, gosh, I can't even think about how space is not vacuous. It's really, it has ether and matter in it, and you just can't see it. But, it's really there.
One in spaces, right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about healing and shamanic healing. And I am just guessing here, but you would use Reiki in conjunction with the Akashic Records. Is that correct?
Well, I usually do Reiki. Yes, I do Reiki from a distance, and I do it in person. But it really doesn't matter the space and time between sending energy or using energy on someone. In terms of the Akashic Records and Reiki itself, there's not a specific correlation between the two, although I personally use both. I'll do a reading, and then at the end, I'll do a specific healing to clear the energy from the person, clearing out the chakras. In terms of shamanic work, my shamanic work consists of helping people accessing realms for a person, so that usually it brings them to a place of where their traumas or stress began, usually rooted in childhood, and the parts of our soul that were left behind or fragmented from our whole soul. And soul retrieval is, in shamanic traditions, is usually incorporating or bringing the soul back to the person, seeing the trauma, have the person not validate it, feel it from an outside source as myself, and then try to incorporate it back in and almost bringing back usually the child part of ourselves into ourselves. And that's done through a shamanic journey, which is also accessing almost the same information or the same place. And sometimes it comes in through the lower worlds, the middle world, and the upper world, where you have different symbols coming through, usually in the form of animals, spirit animals, that will be pass on information. So if a person sees a specific animal, for example, like an eagle flying in the air, and wisdom, power, fox, learning how to become more, have more play and fun in your life, but also watch out for people around who are sleeping. Yeah. And a dog, of course.
What does the dog symbolize? Kind of loyalty.
Loyalty, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't used to believe in Reiki. But I once took a drive from Florida all the way up to Minnesota to visit some friends of mine. And as I got closer to Minnesota, it started to snow and the roads were getting pretty bad. And so I was gripping my steering wheel, just, and then I got to go up and meet my friends, and one of my friends was a massage therapist. And I told her my hands are just so cramped from gripping that steering wheel. She says, "Let me do a little Reiki on you." And I'm like, "What's Reiki?" And she's like, "Well, she said, it's hard to explain, but she said, it's a no-touch therapy." And I went, I don't know if I believe in that stuff. She says, "You don't have to believe in it. You just let me do it for you." I said, "All right." So we sat there. We were in a bar, and we sat there. And let me have your hand. Put your hand up like this. She just went like this around my hand for about maybe 5 minutes. Gone, completely gone, like it had never happened. And I was like, okay, maybe there is something to this, you know. But,
Yeah,
Well,
try crystal healing.
We have the ability to expand our energetic field, and it's not just within the barrier of our skin. We have an auric field around us that see a person's aura, which is the energy that a person is either thinking, feeling, or different chakras or energy systems are working or not working. And so our bodies prove that, and it shows that it's outside of our body. So our hands are an extension of that energetic field, and it goes beyond our hands. And the more we actually breathe deeply, the more our auric field expands, and it comes through from the heart through the hands. And through the hands, we're able, with intention and love and compassion, to actually shift a person's energy from our own to the next person.
I gotta say too, Victoria mentioned crystal healing. I gotta say, I'm remembering when I was in Mexico as a little boy, like a really small rural town in Durango, Mexico, and I saw some healing. It's very common in Mexico, I think. Some no-touch healing that involved an egg, like passing an egg over someone's body, and I think it was very effective. But it reminds me, it's like different cultures have perhaps their ways of doing Reiki with nothing, with a crystal, with an egg. But the same principles seem to be there.
Yeah, the egg is called Olympia, and I use that technique myself. And Olympia is running the egg over the chakras or through the body. And because the egg is porous, it absorbs energy. And in some cases, I've never experienced it, but I've heard from shamans that the egg could turn black from the amount of the energy that's in the body. What I've experienced is an egg cracking. In other words, you run it if a person is in a high energy state, or a specific part of their body is holding on to energy, which would be in specific chakras of the body, right? First chakra, second chakra. You run it over the body, the egg will crack. And
I got to tell you. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, okay, so you mentioned I have another effect with the egg that's bizarre. You mentioned it turning black, but you haven't noticed, but you have noticed it cracking. Well, what I noticed happened was that after they passed it over to this person in Mexico, they cracked it open in a glass, clear glass of water, and when I looked at it, it looked exactly like a human eye. Like it had pupils, it had eyelashes. It was an exact copy of a human eye, but it came from inside the egg.
Yeah,
there's another weird thing.
That's the reading. Usually they put a glass of water and they'll drop the egg after they crack it, and then it can do the reading. In terms of reading an egg, there's different webs and different connections, and you could read it based upon your own intuition.
Right.
So yeah, that's another technique that people use, and it's I've used it a few times. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it, but I do know I'm familiar with the technique of how it operates.
What do you think about the idea of someone doing this egg technique on themselves? Does that work?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. If you take an egg and you run it through your body, actually what you do is you start at the head, working at the crown, to the third eye, face, throat chakra, and then down the arms.
Yeah, I remember seeing this. I saw this when I was a boy. Okay, what you're describing,
Yeah, running it down the chest and then in the back, if you can do it in your back, and then your legs, and then you usually crack it and throw it out. Or you don't want to really touch the stuff afterwards, because it's really taking away a lot of negative energy from the body.
Wow.
Because of the pause. I mean, you can feel it when you're next to a person who's high energy or has good vibes or bad vibes. You can feel it. Those vibes are being released, and the egg removes a lot of that energy.
Okay. I wonder, okay, so thank you for giving that, because that's something I've had in my life for maybe close to 30 years. I never really had any contact. So you put a lot of explanations for that incident. Do you know anything about this? Because to me, this story also sounds similar to Reiki healing and to the egg thing. But you tell me if you have an explanation for this or if you've heard of this phenomenon. So it's a phenomenon of people in a seance. And this happens in modern times. I think Leslie Kean talks about it online. She's a journalist. Leslie Kean recently talked to someone who was having a seance. It was dark. They said it's necessary for it to be dark during a seance. But she says that what happens is when a person is in a seance, something called ectoplasm will come out of their nose or their body. And this ectoplasm kind of looks like silk. But this ectoplasm then forms a horn, or it forms a person, or it forms something, and that's how spirits communicate. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Do you have any explanation?
No, it doesn't. No, I wouldn't say that I have any experience in that. I can say that, I mean, we do have attachments. In shamanism, there are attachments of ancestors that can attach themselves to certain parts of our body to create specific addictions and diseases that we are to be prone to. I studied under a person by the name of Itzhak Berry, who's a shamanic practitioner and author in Manhattan. And in his book, he speaks about when one of his clients walked in the door and he said, I just can't stop. I can't stop with the alcohol. And in the back, he saw her grandfather, who was almost in his presence behind him, like drinking with a bottle. And when he cut the cord between the grandfather and him, and because he saw it, he was able to cut it. A few weeks later, he said, it's like I haven't taken a drink since our last session. So,
when you mentioned this idea, or when I was doing my research on you, just looking at the topics you're into, when I saw the trailer to your film, it made me think of a scientific concept in genetics called epigenetics.
Correct.
So epigenetics is fairly new. We don't really understand it too well, but the gist of epigenetics is that the actions of our ancestors can physically affect our modern lives. It could be passed down. So that means if somebody was starving, if our grandfather or grandmother were starving, that will affect the expression of our genetic code, and it will affect our current health. So this is unique because we're not just talking genetics, we're talking the behavior of our ancestors. And that's what sounds similar to what you're saying. That's the closest thing I could think of. Perhaps this is a physical expression of what you're mentioning. This is how it physically works.
Yeah. I can say for myself, as you speak about epigenetics, that's one of the subjects that I study in terms of undertaking the documentary film that I made, and which was about, actually not about the past life, which would be an interesting film. It was more about my grandfather, who was a soldier during World War II.
Right.
And through his particular struggles, I felt, as you would call it, epigenetics, the behavior from, I would say, the suppression of his identity in the family, and how it came to me to express his history. And I in many cases, I kind of felt like an attachment from him. In other words, tell my story. And I as I recall, or I put it to this after I learned about epigenetics, I thought about during February. February was like it's the winter months, and most people, have more of an increase in respiratory, problems.
Yep.
During the month of February is when, for years, I would have like this chest cold. And as I undertook the film that I was doing, and I found out that my grandfather, who was killed in World War II, he died February 8th, and somehow finding him and uncovering this, as I mentioned earlier, as we spoke about the Akashic Records, and validating, or at least acknowledging something from a past life, I felt that I acknowledged his presence, or as a person that existed. And I think through that, the biology shifted also in some capacity.
I could see that working. Yeah, I could see how that would work exactly, like you said. Yes.
Yeah, there's ancestor syndrome, like they say that certain families pass on traits, or they die on the same day as one of the relatives died on. They almost pass on family secrets that are not acknowledged, that are held under the table or secretive, and they somehow seep into the consciousness, the unconsciousness of a family, and play out. and play out in drama. They play out in conflict. They play out in people, acting out the behavior of a relative that they heard about, but they couldn't really, they couldn't validate that person because it was like, don't mention that person. And in my family, my grandfather, who was loved by my grandmother, he was killed in World War II. And my documentary film is about basically finding him after 72 years in a Russian mass grave.
Wow.
And through my grandmother's diaries, I was able to piece this story together to help find him. And
Wow.
on an epigenetic level, what really sprung me into doing this documentary film that I presented was I was going through a divorce, and through my divorce, I was feeling like the emptiness of no contact with my children. And I had a question. I said, "What happened to my father?" My father doesn't even know who his father is. Wasn't interested in who his biological father is. And I went searching. And
Wow. That's pretty deep. Yeah, that's really interesting. This idea that we're talking about is very interesting. We touched on this. There's an episode we did not too long ago called Let's Talk About the Eastland Disaster and the Paranormal. And our guest was Natalie Zett. Anyway, it's very similar to you. So Natalie Zett found out that a long lost great aunt of hers was in this huge disaster, this boating disaster that happened in Chicago. And so she went on a journey like you to find out about this family member. And then part of the themes we were talking about in that episode, which is what's coming back up today, is this thought about how we should really think about our ancestors and give them attention and honor them. And that's not something that's pushed in modern American society, although it should be, I think. We came to that conclusion. It's a very important and a neglected aspect of humanity.
I think people, when we face our own mortality, that we're not going to be here forever, then we lose the fear of getting closer to grandparents, people who are older than us. A lot of times society places a big emphasis on the here and now, and not so much on who brought us here or who supported us, whether they were here present physically. But I think it's so important for us to honor our relatives and our ancestors, and to actually do the work to try to understand why there was dysfunction, why there was this conflict, and to not allow, I think, parents or relatives or family members to try to shun or push people out of the picture. Nobody really knows anyone's story until we really investigate it, and we do take the energy to do that.
That's a very true point.
And it takes, yeah.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think it's really important. If you look at some of the other cultures, their whole, the basis of their culture is passing stories down, passing things down. And a lot of times they're wanting to pass down, what they consider important. But something that's been hitting the back of my mind is how my grandmother-in-law, she kept telling me, you need to remember these stories. You need to pass down these stories. And I remember thinking at the time going, this is so boring. How many times do I got to hear the same story over and over and over again? And now that she's gone, I'm sitting there going, boy, I really wish I paid more attention. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, sometimes it becomes too late to ask that question, because you think that every day you can do it one day or the next day and the day that thereafter. But then when the time is up, we lose that connection to where we came from, and we try to bury certain things. See, for me, I was 7 years old, and as I grew up in Brooklyn, and I had my own personal traumas in my house and conflicts with my parents, my great escape was going to my grandmother's house, who was a block and a half away. And when I sat at her kitchen table, she would take out her photo albums and show me pictures of people from far away with furry hats and snowy scenes and no smile on their faces. And here I am in Brooklyn playing sports in the street with my friends and having conflicts with my parents. And here I'm brought back to 1938 while I was growing up in the 70s in Brooklyn.
Awesome.
As I look at these photos, I turn the pages and nothing really caught my interest, but I was connecting to the emotions of what they were feeling. Even at a young age, and I came to a picture of a man in a military uniform, which was my biological grandfather, which is really who my grandmother wanted to really show me to pass the story on. So as I sat there eating her soup and eating her food, she was actually saying, please connect to my family so I have someone to tell the story to, so you can pass it on to the future generations.
Great.
And as you just said, at the time, initially I wasn't interested, but eventually I was so interested that every time she was cooking in the kitchen, I'd go to the photo albums in the bedroom and go to her drawers and take these photo albums out. And I'd go home and say, Dad, did you know your father was a soldier? And he would say, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where it would have ended. But it didn't end there because I kept looking at these photo albums. And then 40 years later, when my grandmother passed away, I went back to her drawer, took the stuff after she passed away, and I found all her diaries, and I found this deep love connection between my grandmother and my biological grandfather, and how he was forgotten about.
Wow.
So the stories are so important to tell, because eventually, if we don't give up in telling a story, I think then the remnants of it get passed to the next generation, and then there's some sustenance that a family has to say, where we came from, this is who we are, this is what we're made of, and this is what we struggled through, and this is why I am this way. And my father and I had a tumultuous relationship growing up, and if I let it be where it was, and not really understood what he went through in a personal journey to understand him, it would have been just complete separation and really no communication. But I actually brought his pain and his wounds to the surface, which he actually thanked me for, and he was thankful that they were opened up so he could feel again, and it opened his heart.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Wonderful.
Yeah.
How is this related to like the past lives? I kind of want to bring that concept back, because we're talking about how, not necessarily genetically, but because of the ripples in our family lives, how is that related to our previous lives? Are our previous lives?
Well,
Are we? I guess what I'm trying to get at is some people say we get reincarnated into other generations that are completely have no relation to us now.
Well, I think actually there are probably little remnants of remembering things that would really bring the past to the present. So, for example, myself, like they say, we choose our parents. We choose the people who are going to teach us the specific lessons about like what our soul might have experienced, or how we're going to evolve on a soul level. So for me, bringing up the memory of a past life from World War II drew me to a deeper connection of understanding to my present condition. So my mother being Jewish now made me face something that I actually avoided probably, because during my childhood, there was a sense of not embarrassment about being Jewish, but there was a feeling like the people suffered too much and looked upon as like it was a difficult time. And it just growing up in Brooklyn, it wasn't I wouldn't say cool. It was the rougher guys were more the Italian guys and the Irish guys growing up in my neighborhood as a kid. And so for me, it was more of a connection towards suffering, and I didn't really feel comfortable with that. So I think I was presented with that to face my past and to face what other people went through or what I have experienced. So I think we are the Akashic Records. If we're able to access them and open up the information, will present the specific scenarios or the specific medical conditions or the specific relationship problems that we're going through in the present moment, and how they come from things that we either need to resolve or we didn't resolve before this present incarnation. So we're always being presented with the same specific lesson until we pass it. How do we pass it? We pass it by acknowledging and going through all the gamut of emotion for that specific that event.
Okay, now I have a quick question. What you said about you're born into the family that you're supposed to be born in. My family was very abusive. And when I look back at my mom and dad, their parents were very abusive. And this goes on and on and on. So I decided to have like a energetic cord cutting. It's like enough. It's healing the generational abuse, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And so now I teach my daughter. So it's like the ripple of abuse has been going on for, I can easily pinpoint it back to the Civil War. But I finally said enough. we're not going to do that. Is that one of the benefits of knowing, or do you think that's one of the benefits of knowing the Akashic Records and your past lives?
Well, I think being reminded of something that we put aside and we're not aware of at an unconscious level is important for us to definitely to be aware of. And it is also, like you just mentioned, to cut cords of things that no longer serve us. That's the most difficult thing, because we're tied to stories, and we're tied to being a victim in circumstances. So when a specific thing is done to us, sometimes it's easier for us to look outward and blame the other person and not look at the lesson that it presents to us on a soul level to evolve. And so one thing I do is I do a thing called soul prints. I read people's fingerprints, and the fingerprints themselves show the specific lessons that a person will need to go through in their life, and what they will be presented with to either remain a victim in that specific circumstance, or what they need to do to overcome it to become actually enlightened and grow from the experience to become your to find your true life purpose. So
Wow, I've never heard of that before.
Is that on your website? I mean, can you do that through your website?
Yeah, it's on my website as well. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I do the readings. Basically, what it is people are born into 4 different schools. They're born into the school of love, the school of peace, the school of wisdom, and the school of service. And we're given specific. There's different stages where, for example, let's say we're in the school of service, which is basically becoming a healer or becoming a person who is of service to others. Basically what happens is a person who is in the school of service, their fingerprints will show that they consistently are the victim of circumstances, that they do too much for people, and then people don't pay them back in terms of, meeting them halfway. They're always being taken advantage of when they give with their open heart. But basically what happens is in that school of service, when you realize that you're no longer the victim, you're actually supposed to be helping people, and it shifts. You validate what your purpose is. And then you don't look at it as if you're the victim of the circumstances, but maybe you have something to offer someone else at a higher level that can actually help them. So once we do that, then it shifts. That's when we become like the healer, we become the teacher. Yeah.
That's
Very
so cool.
Not to change the subject too much, but we talk about UFOs quite a lot on this channel. And I hear you had a UFO experience. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've run into different people. It's funny. I would say maybe about 10 years ago, most of the people I was talking to, I was just talking about the healing work, the spiritual work. And then I would say, I never told anybody this. And I'd say, what was that? Well, when I was younger, I saw this UFO that landed in Michigan. And then another person who was like mostly people in their 70s and 80s who they never really spoke to anybody about the subject, because I don't think they found the person who wanted to hear about it or would believe them. And then another friend said to me the same thing. And then, I kept hearing the stories, and then I'd meet different people who had specific experiences. I would say through my Akashic record reading, I've heard about specific, like a group called the Ashtar Command. I don't know if anybody's familiar or heard of the Ashtar Command. Okay, so I can't specifically define who they are or what they are of an alien council. But I did a reading, and I heard from the outer rings of Saturn. And then when I did an interview on my podcast with a woman, Angela Thompson-Smith, who wrote a book called Voices of the Cosmos, where she actually channels communication between different alien races, she told me that the Ashtar Command comes from the outer rings of Saturn. So that was something that I heard. My personal experience was I was sitting on the beach last summer, maybe about July, and I've had this deep interest in communication or trying to I read these books, and while I'm in the process of reading these books over maybe that week or two, I was at the beach and I was sitting there and I look up in the sky and I see what looked like a silver balloon, but then actually just started to turn into almost a disc, and then just shot up. But I would say it was about 300 to 400 feet off the surface of the beach, and just took off into the clouds. Then this past October, as I was driving in New Jersey on the Turnpike, it was about October, it wasn't the 4th of July, and maybe about 200 feet above my car was a blue Roman candle just exploded right above.
Right.
So this was some of the experiences that I've had that I've later understood to be from most of the people who I watch on different channels or read different information about making contact, or like a contact type of thing, where when people do see it, not myself only, obviously, when people do say they had some type of vision or some type of visual, that there's some type of message or some type of energy download that comes along with that, or the potential for that type of higher consciousness information being presented.
I assume you're talking about the stuff that like Dr. Stephen Greer does, the CE5 thing.
CE5, yes.
Yeah. Have you tried that at all?
I have. I wouldn't say that I've had any specific encounters after doing the CE5 meditation, but I would say that when the time would be right for anyone doing that, then it would present itself with what's supposed to happen. I would say that's probably opening up the channel or the door for that to take place, right? What we ask for, usually what you ask for, you receive. So I think that's something that's definitely an opening. In fact, I had a friend who asked me that today. He said, how do you make contact? He goes, there's something called CE5. I said, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there about it. When I first started hearing about it, I was very apprehensive about it because I thought, you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know. I mean, I'm one who believes that there are a lot of species visiting Earth or actually just live here. And I thought, you don't know what you're calling upon. It would be like somebody doing a Ouija board and opening a portal to somewhere, and you don't know what's going to come through that portal. So, and I'm still a little on the fence about it, but now that I've come to understand it a little bit more, I understand that it's the way in which you call upon these things that makes the difference. It's like anything else in the paranormal, I would imagine.
Well, I think it's necessary to have some form of energetic protection. In terms of shielding yourself from other energies and raising a person's own vibration to a place where they are vibrating at a high frequency. I think we're more prone to any type of energetic attack, whether it be through alien energies or through other type of spirit energies, when our energies are low. And I think the necessity for us to actually, on the note of what you just spoke about, making contact, it's important for us to raise our energy vibration just in general, so that we vibrate higher at a higher frequency. And that requires breathing, meditating, and then I guess when maybe contacting, you are in a higher form. But I have read that there are different alien races which are more benevolent than others, and there are different races that are not so friendly.
Right.
Yep.
Have you do you recall any experiences with any of the alien races? I mean, you said you've seen the.
What's interesting is I was in New Hampshire last year, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say this was a psychic hit or something, or some type of energetic wake up. I was in Lincoln or Conway, New Hampshire, and I told my girlfriend at the time while we were staying there, and it's a very small town. Mm-hmm. I said, I have a feeling there was some type of alien encounter here. And I look it up on the computer, and I hear that Betty and Barney Hill were abducted in the same exact town where I was staying.
Whoa.
So
we just had an episode about that last week. Yeah.
Yeah. So I go
Very
outside. I check it on the I Google it on the internet, and I look up the Betty and Barney Hill plaque was placed right in the town where I'm staying. Which, he spoke about the encounter, I guess 1961 or 62, I don't recall. He and Betty and Barney Hill were encountered where they were abducted at this specific spot. So for me, it was so interesting because I had a feeling, and I would say that was some type of an intuitive hit. That was going on. I've come run into different people, I would say, who I've spoken to, as I mentioned before, but that also deals with shamans as well, who told me, a man who's in his 80s, his name is Hacho Castillo, he's from Ecuador, he told me when he was a young child, he was taken up on a ship and shown how the earth operates, and how there are different groups fighting it out for control over the earth.
Whoa. Were these alien groups or human groups?
No, alien groups.
Right.
Groups. Yeah, manipulating certain, groups of us.
That's what I've heard. I've heard that before.
Yeah, I've heard of that. And then there's other people who I've heard about when they were younger. Their parents were in the military, and what happened was every summer they would go to they would be taken down to the swamps, I guess in the Everglades in Florida, and they would be given like Wrigley's gum, but it was something that put them out.
Oh.
And then they'd wake up the next day on the beach, and then the father would say, "What happened?" And he said, "Nothing." But every once in a while they'd go down there to do something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we are going to get out of here for the night.
Okay.
Adam, it's been great having you.
Thank you.
Very
Adam.
fascinating.
I love
Lots
when
of info.
guests are on the show and I get to actually learn something. I know how pompous that sounds, but I've gone down so many paranormal and new age theories. It's rare when I can find something that I know very little about. So I really appreciate you being here.
I'm honored to be here. I appreciate you having me, and that was one of the things that took place here, where you're able to get some information that enlightens us or helps us grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, tell us the name of your podcast.
The name of my podcast is Conversations with Adam Gell and Inspiring Minds. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, please email that link to
I
me
will.
and I'll put it in the description.
Absolutely.
But
Thank you.
viewers, thanks a lot for watching, as always. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. And when you do hit subscribe, make sure you click on the little bell so you get notified every time we do this. We do this every Sunday and Thursday, more or less. We took last Thursday off, but every Sunday and Thursday. And usually it's at 9 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. 6 p.m. Pacific. And so, and if you have friends that are into what we talk about here, the topics we talk about here, please share it around with them and share it to your socials. We would really appreciate it. So, but anyway, until next time, keep thinking and question everything.
Have a good one.